Let's begin not with the history of warfare that goes well back, predates Homer 2,500 years ago. But let's begin in the mid-17th century with the Peace of Westphalia. And that was important 350 years ago because it is widely believed to be the date of the creation of the nation state. And the nation state, the governments of the world as we know them, pretty much, have existed in that capacity over those 3.5 centuries because of what some scholars have called the Grand Bargain. And the bargain was between the state, or the government, and the nation, or the people. And the bargain was, the state said to the people, in exchange for your loyalty to our flag, whatever it was, and your willingness to serve in our army, we will protect you. And that bargain has held more or less over that period of time. And it is because of that bargain that we have the nation states we have today and the international agreements that have arisen over those 3 centuries. What this bargain also included was a monopoly on violence. And that's part of the reason that for 350 years, a relative political stability has prevailed. Because not only would the government or state protect the people or the nation, but in a more colloquial way of saying it, if any killing was going to be done, the government would do the killing. And part of the guarantee of protection for the citizens or the nation was external as well as internal. We will protect our borders from foreign invasion, and we will protect you from internal violence. We own the weapons, and only we can use them. That prevailed well into the 20th century when, of course, we had the big wars, World War I, World War II, and in the process of legitimizing, if you will, violence and conflict between and among nation states, rules of warfare arose. And those were codified not only by national law, but also by international convention, basically in what we know as the 4 Geneva Conventions, having to do with treatment of prisoners, repatriation of prisoners after the end of the conflict, how civilians should be treated. Those began in the mid-19th century and prevailed all the way into the mid-20th century in terms of the evolution of those conventions. We also, and other nations as well, our military, respective militaries developed their own codes of conduct, and we have field manuals for the Army and other units of our military as to how they are to conduct not only themselves with regard to civilians, but how they are to conduct themselves with regard to prisoners. Now, all was well and good if you believe in that kind of organized violence and restriction of violence, until the nature of conflict and the nature of warfare began to change. We won't go into the history of that, but basically what happened in the second half of the 20th century is the nation state lost its monopoly on violence. And the nation states of the world were no longer able to coerce non-state actors or stateless nations into playing by the rules. And nowhere was that more visible than on our shores, September the 11th, 2001. And that was, if you need an important date, and we don't anymore, but you can mark that down in a way, not as the end of the nation state, but certainly as the end of the nation state's monopoly on violence. Why is that significant for our conversation tonight? Simply because of this. As Mr. Stimson will verify, when we began to capture people in Afghanistan and round up people on our own shores, suspected of having to do with that attack, we didn't know what to call them. Because if they were our own citizens and violating our own laws, they were criminals, and therefore subject to the criminal jurisdiction of the courts of the United States. If, however, they were enemy soldiers, then they fell to some degree under international law and required treatment under the Geneva Conventions that we were signatories to. And it was at that confluence that we began to hear words like enemy combatants, non-uniformed combatants, and various new phrases that weren't quite warrior, but they also weren't quite criminal.